So if you ask a Zen master or a Hindu sage what the most important thing to do or what the most important thing to have to become enlightened is, they'll give you one of two answers every time. One of them will say, there's nothing you can do to attain enlightenment. Forget about it. And then another will say, if you do not desire it more than your next breath, you will not attain it. So both are equally correct, ironically, because that's how all spiritual truths are. It's always a paradox. But for me personally, I kind of fell into the camp of desiring it very intensely. So back in August of 2017, I had been studying self-realization and all that stuff for many years. I understood it all conceptually. I had the knowledge, but it hadn't made its way down here yet and really clicked for me. And so when it did click for me, the experience was so different than the knowledge of the experience. And so I spent a solid 2 weeks floating through life. I couldn't even think a single thought. It was like my ego went on a vacation or something. And it was amazing. It was wonderful. My clients at work even, would ask me about it. You're so different now. What happened to you? And I didn't even know. I was like, what do you mean? What's different about me? And they're like, well, for starters, I haven't even seen you touch your phone for 2 weeks. So that's new. And then secondly, they're like, you're so engaged with me. And I was like, was I ever not engaged like this? Yeah. Because enlightenment is when it really happens, it's so profound that it just leaves nothing in its wake. There's just total emptiness. So you have no reference anymore for how you used to be. All you know is this incredible inner stillness that you have. And so I spent about 2 weeks in that sort of just blissed out state. And for the next year, I really didn't have much of an ego at all. I was very much the Buddha. I sort of thought that was my permanent state from that point forward, or was going to be. And then about a year after that or more, I started to have these aspects of my ego start cropping up again. And it was tough for me. It was kind of a bummer because I judged myself really harshly for that. I said, I thought I was enlightened. I thought I was over this stuff. I thought I was more advanced than this, getting irritated while I drive and whatever else. And I didn't understand how it could just come back like that. And so that's kind of the tough part about being a spiritual teacher is you never really feel ready to teach people because you're always going through your own journey. And so you can only teach from your journey, right? And so if you had asked me what I thought the most important component of self-realization was in 2017, 2018, I would have said desire. That's what worked for me. And that's a valid answer, of course. But if you ask me that today, I would give you a different answer. You know what my answer is today? Anybody have an idea?
Self-love.
Oh, my man. Self-love. That's my answer today. Because until you really can love every single aspect of yourself, then there's going to be a part of you that has been split off and has been marginalized into a dark corner of your consciousness. Are you guys familiar with the term shadow self? You heard that term before? So the shadow self is the collection of all the parts of us that we have shaved off and hated and rejected and pushed into a corner. And it happens from the time that we're socialized as a child. Everyone has been socialized, right? So we grow up in a household and our parents will, for example, let us know that expressing anger is not okay. You don't express anger in this household, which is ironically an angry thing to say. And so the kid, or you, from that point on, learn that, okay, this aspect of me is not acceptable. So I will fight it, suppress it, resist it, hate it, reject it. And so we alienate a portion of who we are into a corner that we don't give love to anymore. And the ego is very good at what it does, right? So the ego's like, oh, give that to me, darling. I know what to do with it. And it just buries it deep in your unconscious mind. But energy can't be created or destroyed, right? So it has to go somewhere. So what happens is that portion of us that we have exiled is in the back recesses of the roots of our mind, and it's crying out to be seen. It's crying out to be accepted and integrated. So that's what develops into the shadow self. I call it the lost self. And we then project those aspects of us that we hate onto others, and we start to judge others. And so until we learn to love those aspects of us, we will always judge others for what we have already judged in ourselves. So the moment that I choose to love unconditionally is the moment my ego dies. But the moment that I choose to judge is the moment my ego is reborn. And this process can happen over and over again. So really the choice to judge rather than to love is the root of all suffering. Anything that you choose to judge, whether in yourself or in somebody else, whether you judge a moment or an experience as not okay, that is putting you in a state of resistance, right? And resistance is suffering. So ego is the belief in separation. The belief I am separate. And the belief in separation is hell. And nobody wants to live in hell for very long. So when you get tired of living in hell, you are forced at some point in your spiritual journey, the belief that I'm separate, the belief that there's parts of me that aren't okay, that I need to shave off and push off into the corner of my mind, that becomes unbearable at that point. It becomes insufferable to you. And so you have no other option than to try and integrate those parts back again. And that integration or reconciliation can only happen through love, because love dissolves boundaries. Love is like the great catalyst that exalts the lowly parts of us that we've hated and rejected and infuses them with their highest good, with their highest potential. So love will literally transform your fear into wisdom. It will exalt your pride into humility. Humility is just another word for confidence. It will exalt your insecurity to compassion. So it will call the highest good out of those parts of you. So it's never the act of fear or the act of hatred or whatever that you're loving. It's the part of you that struggled with that. It's the part of you that was ignorant of truth in that area. It's always a part of you. And so until every part of you has been loved and integrated, some of it is going to keep cropping up in your experience of life, and you'll continue to project that onto others in judgment. So that's what kind of happened to me, was that I had a lot of these shadow aspects that I had not yet loved that started to come back up. And what had happened in my awakening was that the realization I had was so dramatic. The gravity of it was so monumental that it sort of like tied my ego hand and foot to a chair and duct taped its mouth and shoved it in a closet. But it was still there. And it took it like a year to like wiggle its way out of the closet. I'm home. Did you miss me? That was a near-death experience. So, at that point I was very confused. I haven't even struggled with this stuff for over a year now. Yet here it is rearing its ugly head. So until you have self-love, you really have nothing, Love is the energy of the universe. Love is what we all emanate from and where we return to. So everything is here to be loved. Every aspect of you is here to be loved. Whether it's your fear of abandonment, whether it's self-hatred. Can you love the part of you that fears abandonment? Can you have compassion on the part of you that is insecure? And every time that I teach this, whether like on YouTube or whatever in person, I always get people that will say things like, well, are you saying I should love a child murderer? The answer is, of course, oh yes, you better love the child murderer. They need it worse than anybody. When people are ignorant of love, they can only behave insanely. They can only do evil. So how can we expect someone who doesn't have love to behave any other way? So if you choose to judge the child murderer, you're validating what they see in themselves, right? You cannot hate anything away. You cannot hate an aspect of yourself away, because what you fight, you strengthen. So to judge in this example, the child murderer is to create the child murderer. To judge your hatred as being not okay is to create more hatred. Does that make sense? Any aspect of you that you deem not okay, you actually infuse that aspect of not okayness with more not okayness. Only love can show the truth of the situation, that there is no such thing as separation. There is no actual separation. It is always an illusion. There is no part of you that you can actually get rid of. So the main question for today's meditation is going to be, what am I not loving right now? What parts of myself have I made into an enemy? Jesus famously said in Matthew, the book of Matthew, "You've heard it was said in the days of old." How many of you guys know this passage? Nobody. Shame on you all. You've heard it was said in the days of old that you should love your friend and hate your enemy. Old Testament. But today I'm giving you a new commandment, that you should love your enemies. Bless those who persecute you. Do good to them. Because in doing so, you will be children of your Father. Love is always unconditional, right? There's no such thing as conditional love. The sun doesn't discriminate on what gets its light. It just radiates in all directions. And it illuminates anything that's willing to bask in its light. And anything that does bask in its light, the light of love, receives the transformation. So the only option is to love it. Whatever it is here to be loved. And it will continue asking you to love it by projecting itself until you do love it. Whatever it was, no matter how wrong or evil you thought that it was, you only ever behaved that way because you were ignorant of love. How could you expect any other behavior? Can you have love for yourself at that stage? Can you forgive yourself? Not even for the action, but for rejecting that part of you which committed that action. No one is evil. Evil does not exist. There is only ignorance. In the same way that darkness does not actually exist. It is simply the absence of light. And light expels darkness not by fighting it or hating it, but by simply revealing the fact that it was never actually there. And likewise, perfect love casts out fear by showing you that there's no such thing as separation. When you judge yourself, you create a boundary. When you love yourself, you remove a boundary. Can you have radical, relentless, passionate love for yourself? The universe is not judging. God is not judging. You're the one who's been doing that. So can you forgive the part of you that has judged yourself? If you can forgive yourself, you forgive the entire world in equal proportion. Hate or judgment cannot heal a broken heart. Only love can do that.